Hey guys, this is Jessi Kneeland of Remodel Fitness, and this is my Q&A series called Ask Jessi Kneeland. All right, so today I have a question by JR. Says, people always talk about happiness being a choice, and well, on the one hand, I guess I agree, I just don't know how anyone makes that choice. If you're unhappy, how do you just choose to become happy? And how do you know you're not just lying to yourself? All right, so this question is so wonderful to me. Particularly the last part, there's like a few pieces to it. But particularly the last one, which is how do you not know that you're not just lying to yourself? If you're choosing being happy, it does seem like on some level you maybe are just lying to yourself. And that's something that we don't really talk about much, because I think in the whole like power of positivity world that is emerging right now and becoming very popular, people are focusing on choosing gratitude and practicing making mindset shifts. And, we say, okay, happiness comes from within. And I know a lot of my clients and people doing that work, they believe those things. However, it still feels weird to do, because we are kind of taught that like the opposite of all those things, that happiness comes from without, that it's like circumstances that make you happy. We use the phrase that makes me happy instead of the phrase I'm happy while that's happening, or like that is creating an environment within me in which I choose to be happy. So it's like the language we use, even, it's very external. And so it's hard to fight against that, even if you truly logically believe that happiness comes from within and you get to choose. So I will say, in terms of how do you make that choice, it is a consistent practice. You won't always make it. And you certainly can't just go from mostly choosing to be unhappy to suddenly mostly choosing to be happy, or at least most people won't be able to make that choice. Usually, you start to become aware, so awareness comes first. Oh, wow, I'm making a lot of choices to be unhappy day to day. When you interpret everything you see as like punishment, or like that you're the victim of them, you're going to be unhappy most of the time, or a huge chunk of the time. So let's say your mindset is what's leading you to view everything as like an attack on you. Well, in that case, then like, when the your barista gets your coffee wrong, or you get caught in traffic or whatever, it's going to feel like, because your mindset is sort of in this place, it's going to feel like, well, these are external circumstances that are making me unhappy. So you kind of got to backtrack a little and bring awareness in first. In that moment, if that's how you see it, it's going to be really hard to be like, well, it's making me unhappy, but I choose to be happy anyway. That doesn't really work. You have to start earlier. You have to start with the awareness of your mindset and your awareness of how you judge things and how you view things, because that's the one you have control over. That's what you have the ability to control. It's not so much like a light switch as it is kind of a retelling of the whole experience of being a person. So you have to start with awareness of what your mindset is doing. That's why it's a series of practicing in small choices. If it were easy, if it was just like you choose, then I wouldn't have a job. I mean, nobody in my world would bother do the work we do, because you would just be like, hey, everybody just choose to be happy. And they'd be like, oh, okay. And then they would, and it would be lovely, but it's not how it works. So you have to backtrack. You have to start with awareness of your mindset. Choose to unravel, acknowledge, and do some deep digging within your mindset, because that's where the choice comes from. You get to choose not to take it personally when somebody gets your coffee wrong, not because in that particular moment you just decide like, I don't care about this coffee, but because you did the work initially in your mindset to know that you are taking on, or like you are assigning meaning to a moment that isn't real. So you have to be able to take responsibility for what's in your control and what's real and what's not, as opposed to allowing yourself to stay in this mindset that makes you unhappy, that allows you to see everything in a way that it makes you unhappy. So you got to go way back to the beginning and build from there. And it takes time, honestly. Nobody that I know has just flipped a switch. So there's that. The other thing I really want to talk about is this idea of like, what if you're lying to yourself? Oh my God, what if we are just lying to ourselves? What if being happy is just lying to yourself? Okay, I love this because truthfully, maybe I am, honestly. I think like a big part of why I'm fantasy driven, very imagination driven, why I have like Dr. Seuss and unicorns and fairies on my arm. I'm trying to show the camera. Why do I have that? What is that? Why do I don't know, make up meditations that are so like nonsensical? And why am I so drawn to that? It's because that's the part of my brain that does let me choose. And it's always been there. I mean, I love fiction. I've always been, that's just who I am. And not everybody is like that. I consider myself very creative, but it's more than just creative. It's fantasy driven. I don't know how else to put it. I am lying to myself probably, but it doesn't matter because I am truly happy. And I think it's just as true to say you're lying to yourself when you're unhappy because you're just picking a story and then going with it. So if your story right now is like circumstances suck and you're unhappy, great. That's your story, but that's not like some objective universal truth about what's really happening to you. That's your story of what's happening to you. And other people might look at your story and have totally different interpretations. And everyone has their own story for themselves and everything we see, and it's all pretty made up. So to me, the wonderfulness of this fantasy creative part of our brains is that that's where we get the choice from. Because if everything was just objective, universal truths and facts, we wouldn't actually have the choice to be happy. Because it would be true that we were or weren't happy, and there would be just one truth, and then that would be it. We would be like, am I happy? Yes? Okay. Now I'm not though. Now, it would be a totally different thing, but that's not who we are. It's not how being a human works. So you have access in your brain somewhere, we all do, to a place where it's all murky and made up. And you get to access that and develop that side of yourself in order to choose to be happy. And that takes a lot of courage too, I think, because if it doesn't come naturally to you, then it might feel like you're giving up this really sort of comforting idea that there's one right and one wrong. There's like one interpretation, there's happy and there's unhappy, and I'm one or the other, and how can I choose? But that's not how it is, and it's much more fluid and sexy and delicious and weird and horrible and all these things. It's so much more than this like linear or kind of binary sense of happy or not happy. And you have to be willing to be a little weird and creative, I think, maybe to access that. And that includes kind of the willingness of being like, hey, maybe I'm lying to myself. I don't know. But the truth is, even if you were lying to yourself and you found a way of making a choice that says, okay, I did this work on my mindset and I choose not to be unhappy about this circumstance. In fact, I choose to be grateful because they messed up my coffee, and what a great opportunity for me to learn or grow in some way, So that's a choice that you make. And if you do that and you're like, okay, well, I guess that, that makes me happy. Like I now I have this opportunity instead of this problem. So that's cool. I guess I'm happy. In that moment, you could literally stop and be like, wait, am I lying to myself? It wouldn't matter because the effect it's going to have on you physically is it's already happening. If you make that choice, it affects you and it changes your hormones and it like does all this stuff that feels really good. So it's going to make you happy to choose to be happy is essentially what I'm saying. So if that's true, then we get to create much more about our own realities than like people want to believe. And in that case, it eventually isn't a lie. So even if it starts and it feels a little untrue, kind of like people with mantras where they're like, whatever mantra, I am brave and I'm happy. If that's what you're repeating and it doesn't quite ring true, it doesn't have to necessarily, because if you're making choices and taking action that align with that, eventually it will become true. And then it'll start to feel true when you say it, because even if it starts as kind of inspirational or aspirational, I guess I should say, eventually you make choices, and then those choices inform you, your self-image, and even your physiology, and it becomes true. So that's my 2 cents on happiness, being a choice, and how to do it, and how to not worry about whether or not you're lying to yourself.